Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week we are joined by Katie Wingert from First Responder Wellness and the Counseling Team International for an insightful discussion around normalizing brain health. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are here on another weekly roundtable, and this week we are going to be talking about normalizing brain health. So before we get into that, everybody should know Chris and myself, we are the founders of Law Enforcement Coaching. We are joined by our roundtable regular, Mike Lawson from Chula Vista PD. He's the wellness coordinator, and he's also a member of our team. And we have a new face, a special guest. And Katie, I'm just going to throw it to you and let you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Well, hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you. My name is Katie Wingert, Dimedio, and I am with a company called First Responder Wellness, and we offer wellness services for public safety professionals, so fire, police, and we do that on a pretty large continuum of care, but primarily speaking, we have a long-term residential substance use and mental health treatment center that is exclusive to public safety, where one of the things that we do and one of the services we offer is neurofeedback. So I think that's where we're going to be talking today about brain health and normalizing brain health and not just mental health.
And we have had the opportunity to visit First Responder Wellness and see you guys in person. I just have to say, for anybody that's tuning in, if you or somebody that you know is dealing with addiction, they are someone to go to. They are someone to check out because, like she said, it is for first responders exclusively. And it's a really, we have worked with a lot of different people, and there's a lot of great people doing stuff, but they are nailing it in every area. So a little, plug for them on that. But going into the brain, give us, I'm going to throw it right back to you and let you dive in to the good stuff, and I'm going to come back on it.
Okay, awesome. So, I mean, I think, where we can kind of start this conversation is Tami, you and I were talking about, how can we have a conversation around more and more of the conversation around normalizing mental health and destigmatizing. What was the word you said? You came up with a cool phrase, like dismantling mental health.
Destigmatizing mental health. Yeah. I think in mental health, there is a stigma that if mental health means there's something wrong with you, where we need to take a proactive approach. We need to train our brain and work it out. I think I'm going to steal your line, but work it out like a muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the brain, something that we've learned, I'll kind of talk about what we see, how we address it. So much of, when people come into care with us, so many of the stories that we will hear is that they essentially didn't get there maybe when they could have, because they were waiting and waiting and waiting for the time when maybe I'll get through it. Maybe I will brush this off. Or, they came from a generation where it was a little bit more difficult to talk about the tough stuff. You kind of shoved it away, you packed it away, you sucked it up, the dirt, all of that stuff. You rubbed dirt and then you got on with life. Well, that's not quite the way that the brain works. And I think, well intended, I don't think, there was an awareness that, exposing yourself to cumulative trauma essentially will train your brain to be traumatized. So I used to work for a company called the Amen Clinics, and I worked for Dr. Daniel Amen for over 5 years. And we would do these really fancy brain scans. And we would do these scans of the brain, but we would always compare them against a norm. And we would always do like these really, integrative and intensive psychological evaluations. And so what we would do is we would get to the root cause of why people were having different mental health symptoms. The intention there was really to identify, well, where is it starting and what can we address first? Because also, what they learned over time was that, you may very well put somebody on the right medication. However, if there's other stuff going on, like a traumatic brain injury that you didn't know about, or somebody's brain is so highly stimulated because it's also psychologically or emotionally traumatized, well, then the order of care matters. The order of medication matters, and how you address the brain and the order in which you address it in matters. So all of that to say, some of the really unique patterns that we saw in the brain, we would see physical injury that was pretty easy to spot. But there was also a very specific pattern that we would see when somebody had gone through emotional trauma. And it hangs out right above the limbic system, and it creates like a diamond shaped pattern of overactivity. So I say all of that about the brain to say that when you are consistently exposed to traumas, it may not be the first or second or 10th time that you're exposed to it, but eventually the brain learns how to pick that stuff up really quickly and remember it. But when the brain remembers something, it doesn't tell you about it. You just feel funny, or you feel grossed out, or a smell hits you and you feel like you're transported in time and you don't know why. Or you jump because your brain is telling you to be on high alert all the time. But the next thing you know, you're jumping because, the refrigerator door slams too hard and not because there's an actual like assailant, threatening your life. So kind of fast forward that. So the brain is designed to help you to remember to stay safe. Well, that's great if you're in danger, not so great if you're not in danger anymore. And so that stuff will start to come out sideways meaning in mood, in sleep, in eating, in emotional regulation. And then eventually, this is kind of a huge jump, but then we end up, in a situation where somebody may be using maladaptive coping mechanisms, and they really don't even realize that they're maladaptive coping mechanisms. And then the substance use happens. And then when they end up in care with us, one of the things that we have the opportunity to do at First Responder Wellness is also provide them with neurofeedback. So I can explain more about what neurofeedback is, but before I go way too geeky mode, I'll take a quick break there.
No, I love it. Chris and I are both clinical hypnotherapists, so we're fascinated by the brain. That's kind of what led us into that arena. And then I'm going to, at some point in the conversation, go all the way back into childhood because, you're talking about, well, I guess I'm going to talk about it right now, but, you're talking about trauma. And yes, in the first responder field, you're witnessing traumas, you're having your own traumas happen, but trauma can go all the way back to the womb. It can go back to when you're first born. You can have traumas that stick in our subconscious that plant the seeds. And then as you grow and you're an adult and you have other things, you have a whole compounding effect that shows up also if you don't know why you have these patterns, why you're reacting to certain things a certain way. And a lot of people, when they come to us, it's like, well, I know what it is. And it's like, okay, do you? Yes, that happened, but did you have something happen before that? And it can be a trauma can be as simple as, a 5-year-old who's lived at home. They've been very sheltered. They haven't had a lot of play dates. They, everything's love and they're in a healthy, good home. And then they go to preschool or school, kindergarten, and somebody pulls their hair and calls them stupid. That's an emotional trauma for them. And it might not be a big deal. And that's just part of being a kid and we move on. But if that hurts them emotionally, that's going to plant the seed. So that's going to create patterns later. So, guys, do you want to chime in? Because I know Katie and I will just take it.
We'll do this all day.
Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, so my traumas, one of my good friends, when I worked for the sheriff's department, he died in the line of duty. And then years went on and I had three close friends take their lives. And those traumas affected me differently, each of them. But it was very apparent, the first one, which was my friend dying in the line of duty. I didn't handle it very well. I'm sure Chris could attest to this. They don't really teach us really anything, how to deal with those traumas. And you're right, Tami, like some of those, go back to your childhood and you're like, why is this affecting me? But it's because it hasn't been addressed. That's in simple terms how I see it.
Absolutely. Chris?
Yeah. So Katie, when you talk about from the neuroscience side of things, first responders that continuously experience trauma, the brain remembers this, right? And then it causes, some self-destructive behavior as a result. Why is that? Why does the brain latch onto these things?
Yeah. So, because the brain, thank you for asking that. And Mike, thank you for sharing that. Every time I hear you talk about like how you ended up in the space of wellness, I'm very appreciative of it because I know that it helps a lot of people. So thank you for sharing. The brain does that because the brain is designed to remember, and the brain is designed to connect. So we're built for connection. Because if you really want to like get down to the nuts and bolts of things, it's because if we survive, we make babies. Like if we stay safe, we make babies, and like the species goes on. Like that's pretty much biologically driven. Like that's where it comes from. But it's because the brain is designed to remember to keep you safe. And so also too, something very interesting about the brain is that scary things, uncomfortable things, awkward things, those register at a much deeper level of your brain. And when I say deeper, it's the part of the brain that's more it's less designed for thinking and more designed for sensing and feeling. And so it requires almost no cognitive processing, like what am I thinking and feeling? It almost is entire like instinctual and in your body. And that is really truly to just keep your brain designed to know if that snap of a like piece of wood next to the fire, you know, in the tribe, is that a kid who just got up out of bed or off out of the tent, or is that like a threat, like, you know, to your survival? So truly the brain is designed to help you connect and help you thrive. I mean, just help you connect and help you survive. And so it is designed to register scary, icky, weird things at a more instinctual, deeper level and remember them more. The brain is also designed in a way that I mean, is the most calorically expensive organ on the planet. There's nothing like it designed. I mean, the brain is so fascinating and so dynamic.
So it's more survival then, like you said, it takes us all the way back to hunter-gatherer when we ran in tribes. We have to connect. And if we instinctually, if we don't connect with a tribe, we don't survive, right? We lessen our likelihood of survival. So okay, you know, because I think about this, and you know, with Mike being in the sheriff's office for 20 plus years, yeah, we experience a lot of trauma, and that trauma, it can be good, it can be bad. You know, the bad part of it is it's always constantly on my mind, right? Seeing, you know, I've lost, you know, several friends of mine in the line of duty, so I'm constantly thinking of that. But because I'm constantly thinking of that, when I do a traffic stop, I'm a little more careful now. So, you know, if there's good and bad, there's some give and take there. The key, I guess, is not to allow it to get too overwhelming to where it's consuming your every thought 24 hours a day. So how do you, and maybe I'm jumping ahead too far, but what's your suggestion for those first responders to kind of put those memories, those experiences kind of in check so it doesn't become too overwhelming?
Yeah. And I'm definitely, so just so we're clear, I'm not like a practicing neurofeedback provider anymore, but I will say, you know, what I've seen at the treatment center and what I've seen where I've worked before, and then what I see through the work that you all are doing. I honestly think that it starts with a grasping and awareness of that you're even having the thought or feeling, because not, and of course, not to minimize how big and serious the loss of, you know, a friend or a life is, but to the brain, that's really obvious, right? At least that gives you a thought. It's like, okay, I can attach that ick to something. But so much in line with what the two of you do, like on a more subconscious level, so many people operate throughout their days, not even knowing before the thought even happens, they don't feel good, and they're aggressive, or not, they just feel agitated and they don't know why. I think the first step to anything, honestly, is gaining that level of awareness into like, wait, what is that I'm feeling? Does that even belong in this place? And then starting to organize how you're actually thinking and feeling and what it's actually related to. And so as far as suggestions go, I think it all, and Tami and I talk about this all the time, that there's no competition in this space. Like there's enough, what did we say the other day? Like there's enough pain to go around. Like we all need to jump in and like really hammer at this, but all the way on the full spectrum, it's like start with, you know, self-awareness and books, and 100% get a coach, right? Like get a coach, walk through what you're going through, get into counseling, get the training, and then as things are needed, like work all the way up through what you need. But I mean, the simple answer is like starts with awareness, starts with mindfulness, starts with like grounding yourself. And then also, you know, bringing in the professionals that can help you walk through that and get the tools so that when you do pull somebody over, you can keep yourself safe because you have to, but you're not distracted by the trauma of what's already really happened. So that's not entirely like a black and white answer, because I don't think one exists here. But that is that's kind of how I categorize it. That's how I think of it.
Well, and I think too, like you're saying, starting with self-awareness, I think some people, if depending on how much trauma, if they had a rougher childhood or they've had a lot of trauma, especially in the first responder field, and a lot of men particularly, part of the culture was don't talk about it, suck it up, buttercup. We know that. But I think some people are afraid that once they start going into some of that, it hurts. They're holding so much pain that they don't want to look at it. If you pull that string, it's opening Pandora's box and it's going to become too overwhelming. And so it stops them from actually seeking any kind of help. But my thing is, you're going to have pain no matter what. We always have challenge, we always have struggle, we always have pain. What kind of pain do you want to have? Because if you start down the healing journey and you start working with practitioners of different kinds, that pain eventually that you've been holding on, and even though you're ignoring it, it's still affecting you. Once you start actually addressing it, it dissipates, it goes away, it's going to transmute a little bit, but eventually it's not going to hurt so bad. So having a healthy curiosity of why when this happens do I immediately go to anger? Why is it that when this happens I crave a drink? Whatever that is, having the self-awareness, but having the curiosity of why is this how I am? And then going back into, I'm going to go on another tangent really quick, but the childhood again. So we learn our communication, we learn our emotional coping mechanisms, and a lot of people, a lot of kids and young adults learn coping. They don't learn actually healthy communication, effective methods of how do you move through this. It's not usually, and I hope it's getting better. I think the kids now have more conscious parents, so they're not having that. But our generation, we didn't have that. So it's like we had to go through a whole bunch of crap in our youth to then be like, I don't like that. Let's fix it. Let's do some generational healing because, my parent was abusive, so that was abusive, and I don't want to be abusive. So our generation a lot is stopping that, but going back into learning, okay, I learned defense and coping mechanisms as a child. Now I want to learn how to actually respond versus react out of fear and self-preservation. That makes sense.
Complete sense.
Yeah, so as far as a wellness coordinator, I mean, we've talked about this at another roundtable about critical incident debriefs, right, Tami and Chris, and how I think we're doing pretty good nowadays, departments, of having those debriefs. So those are the most critical ones, but what are we doing for all the other ones? And, as a wellness coordinator, like just trying to provide resources to proactively kind of go about that is kind of changing the culture. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, this is a pretty new kind of idea, this wellness unit, wellness coordinator, and we just have to help our people better, just trying to find those resources, vetting them for them, getting the word out about them, educating them, and then actually proactively doing check-ins, whatever that is, with a therapist, a coach, a chaplain, a best friend, just having those check-ins, somebody you can trust, just to get it out. And once you get it out, it's game changer. It really is.
Well, and I know a conversation, we've had too. I think departments need to not be so complacent and just okay if, well, our department they're not into wellness, or they don't need it, or they said they don't need it. That's a cop out. Like, we need to lean in more because every single person, every human being is dealing with something, whether it's professionally or personally. We all go through it. That's part of the human experience. So the departments, if they really want to take a proactive approach, is to lean in and not just let I'm fine be the norm anymore. Katie, I want to come back to you. I want you to dive into what is neurofeedback? Like, what?
Yeah, so I will definitely get into that. And like, since we're on the resource train, let me kind of plug into what you guys were saying. So I think you're right. And I would be, I want to make sure I mention too, it's kind of cool. One of the things that we have done through one of the lines of the services we offer through the counseling team, and I think that this has pretty much been adopted as a norm, like when people go in and they provide wellness services for departments, we actually train departments on how to identify like what their top 10s are. So it's like, okay, close calls, or, you know, line of duty deaths, or pediatric, anything big pediatric, right? And so we'll go through and we'll help departments design like, what are your top 10 calls? And then there's just an agreement. It's like, these things happen, it triggers us to respond, so that no one's having to go through, like no one in a senior position is having to go through to people that are underneath them in rank saying like, hey, do you need a debrief? Because almost 100% of the time that answer is like, no, I'm fine. Like, no, I'm fine. So it's, we just kind of create like a structure for that. So it's like, don't take the thinking out of it. And like, we just show up when these things happen.
Yep.
So that there's not, because even in that answering of a question, like even in a passing conversation, that sense of, I need to not say how I'm feeling, because maybe I don't even know how I'm feeling yet. It's been 13 hours since I just like pulled that kid from the pool, or I don't want to say that I'm not okay. And even if I was okay-ish, I don't even have the words for it. So we are definitely on board with that idea of like a more proactive approach to wellness. And, you know, Mike, I agree. And we do that all the way from, you know, we encourage departments to start at academy levels. Like, yay, you got hired. That's rad. And you made it through academy. That's great. Hey, first year of probation down, got it? Great. And then we start, you know, even at the academy, introducing wellness and pulling in the family. And I know that's something that you also do, obviously, with law enforcement coaching. You do amazing trainings. So we just start that education early on, and then continue to plug proactive approaches all the way up to and through the treatment center, which is, you know, the longer term treatment modality. So neurofeedback. You want me to skip into neurofeedback now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
keep going.
So neurofeedback. So essentially, how it looks and feels. So I'll tell you what it feels like for the client, and then I'll tell you what's actually happening, and I'll tell you why it works. So when somebody does neurofeedback, we put electrodes on their head, and then we plug those electrodes into an amplifier, and the amplifier gets plugged into a computer, and all of that picks up is all of the sounds coming off of the brain electrically. So it's literally like little stethoscopes for the top of the head. When you think, feel, move, breathe, do all of the things that humans do, you're creating electricity and electrical movement in your brain. And so what we're doing in neurofeedback is we're actually listening to brainwave activity, kind of transforming it and putting it on a screen so you can see the wavy lines. And then we take the brain waves that we want to see more of and the patterns that we want to see more of, and then we only give positive reinforcement when we see those. So what it sounds, looks, and feels like for the person is you put on something auditory, you look at a screen, we put the electrodes on the head, we plug it into an amplifier, and then we put all of that information into a computer. The computer listens, and then when your brain does what we want it to do, we'll give you some sort of auditory cue. I mean, it's just like Pavlov's dogs in action, like 100%, right? It's like, so if your brain is producing a more balanced brainwave state, we will provide a ding, a ping, something where your brain can go, ooh, what's that? What's that? And that's actually all it takes. Feedback is very, very, very powerful. I mean, you can see that in human connection. It's like, how do you know you're okay? Christy said it earlier. It's like, to be rejected from a group means you die, literally, right? And all the way back in tribal sort of settings. So if you give a brain feedback, it will attend, which is why we also see people repeat behavioral patterns or relationship patterns, because it's like your brain does what it's used to and what it gets feedback for, even if the feedback isn't good. So anyway, so we do auditory and visual feedbacks. We give points. It makes the brain feel like it's doing something right. And then, because the brain is super efficient, but also very lazy, when your brain is producing balanced brainwave states, you're burning less calories. It's not working so hard. It starts to feel better. And it's a very subtle sense of feeling better. It's almost like you feel it in your body, even though it's like happening in your brain. And the brain goes, oh, wait, hold on. I just like saved some calories and some thoughts, and I am still safe. I'm just going to do that more. I'm just going to do that more. And your brain just very quickly learns how to electrically behave that way. And it's no different. I mean, it is different. It's a little bit more complex, but it's like the same reason we don't have to remember how to turn a knob. We just it's just ingrained in our brains. Like we don't have to remember how to turn a blinker on in a car anymore. You know, it's like we just do those things so repetitively that we've created neural pathways. Same is true for thoughts, feelings, and emotions. You think the same thing repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. You don't even have to work to think it anymore. So that's essentially how it works. And typically people will do like, I would never have started anybody unless they were willing to commit to an absolute minimum of 12 sessions. I wouldn't even get them started because it's almost like going to the gym, 8 or 10 times. Now the brain is a organ, it's not a muscle, but you can treat it like it's a muscle. You can train it to do things, and then it will also remember how to do that in the future. So if you looked at somebody doing neurofeedback for the first time ever, you'd be like, okay, they're playing a game with their brain. Sounds real clinical, but that's actually what's happening behind the scenes. And then the program that we use in particular at the treatment center is based out of the research out of UCLA in the 90s that was done specifically on veterans with PTS who were suffering from alcohol addiction. So it's a tried and true research backed, like outcome driven modality for neurofeedback.
It's
And you said, well, no, I think it's fascinating too. I've never heard of that. And how many sessions do you typically want somebody to do?
Yeah, I mean, the true base, I mean, if you really want like really solid outcomes, it's like I always would encourage people to do like 40. But as long as you can get over that 20 mark, which is very reachable, especially in a treatment center setting, as long as you can get there, you start to notice changes. And it's a very subtle change, which is great because if you think about it, you don't want extreme changes because it's about balance. Like the middle is really quiet. Like, it's not that big of a thing. But yeah, around 20 sessions, definitely as a minimum. And then the actual kind of like the best outcomes really come if somebody can commit to at least 40. And then of course it really depends on what they have going on. This is used for kiddos with autism, and then it's also used for peak performance. So it really depends on what somebody is coming in for, how much they're going to need.
Well, and I like the repetition is key. Like you said, you can't just go to the gym one time and okay, it's fixed. Like there's so much that goes in, and that's with wellness that it correlates to all wellness resources because we see people, I went and I talked to a therapist, it didn't work, or I saw a coach, it didn't work. It's like, okay, good start. You gotta keep going. And I talk about this all the time. It's said that it takes on average 30 days to make a habit, 30 days to break a habit. So if you have been, we call it stinking thinking, but if you have been negative on everything for your whole life, you got to give yourself some grace and give time to retrain. I think it's really cool because I love what you do because everything we're trying to do in the holistic wellness space is take out the woo-woo. I have all my certifications that could be considered a super woo-woo, but we are very much about like, no, there's actual science behind all of this. When you talk about there's energy, it's not just like, ooh, your vibes. No, there's actual electric energy.
Yeah. Yes.
It makes sense. Mike, I can keep going, but do you guys have anything you want to chime in?
Katie, I remember last time I visited your facility, they talked about what you were just talking about, the neurofeedback. And can you tell us the difference between that and EMDR and the results you're seeing? I know there's probably different results, but I've heard really good things about the neurofeedback compared to the EMDR, but they're also both good.
Yeah. And I think to kind of, I forgot the words that you just used, Tami, but you were saying like do these things holistically, right? So EMDR and neurofeedback are two very different modalities that hang out in the exact same space of the brain. I'm not an EMDR specialist, or we also offer accelerated resolution therapy at the treatment center as well. That's one of the primary modalities that we use as well. But essentially they're all brain-based. So with trauma, the left and the right hemispheres of the brain can become incoherent, like they lack proper communication. So with EMDR, and I'm speaking just having like been in enough, trainings and lessons to hear people talk about it. I've also myself done EMDR for a few reasons. One of them was for like a long-term trauma. And then the other one was actually something that I just, so weird, like just happened upon this like really dramatic trauma. I was just minding my own business, having a coffee on a pier, and like forever had this like super weird thing happen right in front of me. And I'm like, I know what to do with this. Like I'm going to have to do a 48 sleep. Like I'm going to wait. I'm going to do 2 sleep cycles, and then I'm going to call the therapist, and then I'm going to do the EMDR because like I knew what to do. But EMDR essentially is a way to you bilaterally stimulate. So you either use paddles or hand taps, or some people like lights. And what happens is as you're shifting your eyes back and forth or stimulating the left or right parts of your body, it kind of breaks your ability to like stay too stuck for too long. And the therapist will then walk you through whatever subject it is that you're working on. And Tami mentioned it earlier. It's like, if you really want to figure out what's going on now, like go all the way back to like the root. And so in a lot of traumas, that can be all the way to the childhood, right? So, but also too, there's certain big T trauma things, weird things that happen that you can like just address that issue. So anyway, in EMDR, they will sit with a therapist, they will do the bilateral stimulation, they will verbally talk through the experiences, the feelings, and then what happens in that process is it kind of starts to untie some of those neuro connections, which you will find it's interesting. It's like you'll hear somebody talk about one thing, and then you go down the network, and the next thing you know, you're at some story that happened to them when they were like 5 or 6 or 7, like, oh, that's why I can't get over XYZ. And it just helps identify those connections, and also break the connection so things aren't all connected and tied together. So the difference in that is that EMDR is still a brain-based therapeutic modality, just like accelerated resolution therapy, which we also offer, is a brain-based modality where it actually gives people the ability to use the EMDR skills, but do them in the moment in a ground and go sort of situation, which we've started to use because we have a 90% return to work rate. 90% of the people who come through our treatment center are going back to work. And so, we've also realized that in that they're probably going to go back to the exact same traumas, not the exact same, but, very similar, that maybe have brought them in our door. So those are 2 brain-based modalities that are more talk therapy. And then neurofeedback is electrically based. So it's all about how those thoughts, feelings, emotions, and patterns then show up electrically in the brain. So one is a very unconscious process. Neurofeedback is really cool because you don't have to do a lot of talking. But those are the differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the things, what you just said about going back, when you go back, you're going back into some of those triggers. And I think that's where there's some work that could be done. You have to have, again, the self-awareness, and you have to be prepped for it. Even yesterday. So I was in a super cranky mood. I didn't sleep good. I had bad dreams all night. I was cranky. I was short with the kids. I was just cranky. And I was apologizing all day because I had self-awareness. I'm in a bad mood. And I stayed outside. I worked on projects. Chris got here and I'm like, I'm going to go shopping. And I'm like, I'll be quick. I wasn't. I was out. I stayed away from the house, and I got myself into like such a good mood. When I came home, I'm like, okay, I self-regulated. I did what I needed to do, and I'm good. When I pulled in the driveway, I was like, life is amazing. I had the best day. And as soon as I got through the door, the dog is jumping on me. My kid is jumping on me. Everybody's like, ah! And I almost went like, this is why I was in a shitty mood before I left. Like, but I now could balance myself and handle it differently and be like, okay, I'm going to take control of the situation because I've done the work while I was gone to come in, and we're going to handle the triggers in a different way. So I think that's really important because I know Chris too. I'm going to have you talk a little bit when you took your couple months off and you left your patrol car as a time capsule.
Yeah, so I was on the homicide unit, and I was a new dad. I was in school to become a clinical hypnotherapist. I was on the SWAT team, and I was an instructor. Being the new dad was like stress, right? As you guys are parents, that first year that your kid is born, you don't sleep. And being a homicide detective, what types of cases am I investigating? Well, SIDS cases, right? And so I stressed out that first year my son was born, and child death investigations before he was born wasn't a big deal. The moment he was born, it shifted the whole landscape for me. Now it became very difficult to investigate those types of cases. And so it kind of snowballed. And, we talked, Katie, earlier you talked about, that tribal mentality that we have. When I was going through this, I thought to myself, I'm the worst cop ever. Nobody, no detective, no real homicide detective should ever be affected by whatever they see. This is what we do, right? This is supposed to be normal for us. And so what happened, I ended up isolating because it snowballed out of control to the point where I couldn't even be at work anymore. And physiologically, I was feeling the effects of it, feeling claustrophobic, panic attacks, crying for no reason. And it was embarrassing to me being a cop. And so I figured no other cop has ever gone through this. And so I ended up taking 3 months off of work to try to figure out what happened. But what did I inadvertently do? I isolated myself from my tribe, right? And again, if we go back, what does that mean? It means you're not going to survive if you don't have a tribe.
Yeah.
And I left my detective car parked outside of my house on the street for 3 months. 3 months, I did not get into that car. I went back to work. Now, do you think I was ready to go back to work? No, but my FMLA, my sick and vacation, I exhausted everything. So I figured I got to go back to work because I got to pay bills. The moment I sat in that car, it threw me right back to the day I pulled up to my house and took my leave. Everything was still exactly the same because I hadn't touched it. So I created this weird time capsule, and those 3 months that I was away kind of helped, kind of didn't, kind of made it worse. And it definitely made it even more worse getting back into the car because it just threw me back into time again. So I time traveled back. And so I guess the point here is we have to be aware that self-awareness is important. Had I known that, no, this is normal, like other cops go through this, they have emotions, especially parents, right? Maybe I wouldn't have felt so down on myself, and maybe I wouldn't have isolated. Or if I had known, hey, if I take 3 months off and I don't go to the PD, I don't talk to anybody from the PD because I'm embarrassed, I'm isolating myself from my tribe. And that's dangerous. So what I like what you said earlier, what you guys do is there are specific calls where you guys get activated, you guys go out to, right? Because it takes the thinking out of the officer or the firefighter, the first responders' hands. I kind of wish somebody would have done that to me. Hey, Chris, you just investigated a death of a baby. Tomorrow, we're going to schedule you to go see a psychiatrist, right? I think I would have preferred that being told. That seemed to me, for me, thinking back then, that would have been more acceptable for me to do than me actively going out and talking to somebody. Because at that time, my thought process is this: if I go out and I look for a psychiatrist, I'm weak. I'm not a good cop. But if my agency makes me go, well, that's different, right? And I think, but I like what you guys do. These types of calls, we're going to respond to, and we're going to help.
Yeah.
I don't know, Tami. I don't know if I answered any of your questions
Yeah, no,
about
but
the time
just
capsule.
having that, because she said, you got to, when you're doing the work, you're going to feel good. When you're getting any kind of modality, you're getting Reiki, you're getting massage, you're getting neurofeedback or hypnotherapy, whatever it is, you're going to feel good. And when you take a step away, you take a vacation, you feel great. But having the self-awareness of like mentally prepping, okay, I'm walking back in to what was a low vibe, but I'm going to react to it differently because now I have new skills. Now I have a new awareness. And so just being very mindful and present to where you're at, I think can help move people forward through some of the obstacles where I think people kind of freak out that they're not expecting, oh crap, it's not working because now I still feel like shit. No, it is working, right?
Yeah.
Well, the feedback, it sounds almost like you're breaking the pattern of thinking, of thought. Because that's one thing I noticed in that 3 months that I had taken off. I was repeating the same pattern of thought. First thing in the morning, I'd get up and I'd have anxiety. And it was the same process. That thought created behavior, which well, the thought created emotion, a certain type of emotion. That emotion created a certain type of behavior. That behavior created a certain pattern of life. And I was repeating that every day for 3 months. And you wonder why I didn't get any better, because I'm repeating the same stuff. It's not working for me. So it almost kind of sounds like with the feedback, what you guys do is you break that pattern,
Yeah.
and enforce that positive thing,
And I'll take it even a little step further and say, like, what I don't often explain to people is even that thought or that feeling or that emotion, if you actually really dial that back, where it actually starts is actually with a feeling in your body. And I mean, when I say feeling, I mean sensation, a smell, a vibe, a how's today going to go? It's actually like a beyond thought thing. And it's, it's funny because like when you say vibe, like I know that you're saying it in two ways. And like when I say vibe, I mean like actual electrical vibrate. Like that's actually what
it's a real thing.
Like a real, right, a real thing. And Chris, you're like spot on. And I just feel for you. And I appreciate you saying that because I do think that that speaks to a much larger opportunity that we all have. And that, at the treatment center we work on too really hard is we'll have people who have needed to be with us. Like we've never had a faker, believe it or not, at the treatment center. We've never had a cop calling and faking that they're unwell. Like not one, because they're actually there much, much later than they should be. And, at the treatment center too, we do not require that somebody has a substance use diagnosis in order to come into our care. They pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I'm in trouble." We say, "Yeah, we know. Like, let's get you here." Because we don't want somebody having full-blown substance use diagnosis. They don't need to get that far if we can prevent it. And I think that it's almost tragic when I imagine that 3 months for you, what that must have been like, and to be stuck. It sounds like stuck. And so we get calls from a lot of people, well-intended departments, like they mean well, they so mean well. But the opportunity doesn't end with allowing the person to use FMLA and use their personal time and use their personal sick time. The opportunity continues when they open the door to let them back into the department and normalizing that process. So there's a couple of bills in the state of California, and I know that Mike and I are the only ones in California, but there's a couple of state Senate bills that came out. One that said, yeah, of course, PTS is a presumptive injury for police firefighters, of course, absolutely. And then the other bill says, hey, and if somebody goes out on a work comp claim and it's denied, and a single % of that claim is found to be related to the workplace, or not to the workplace, but to the job and to what they claimed it was, then there are repercussions for that, for having denied the claim or sat on it. What that's done, in my opinion, is there's so much value to that, because now we get to have conversations that are generative in nature. Because I think maybe people were really freaked out because we know what a busted knee is going to cost somebody. You pinch a nerve, jumping over a fence in your duty belt, we know pretty much how much is that's going to cost for that physical injury. No one understands, like, no one can pinpoint how much it's going to cost if you address PTS. And to me, I'm like, well, it's the brain. So like, let's address the brain, right? So what it's done is it's created a really cool opportunity for us to have conversations with departments that sound a little bit more like, wait, before you put them on a fit for duty, like, let's see what we can do to support them. Wait. Hey, person coming into our care, while we'll never ever give legal advice, maybe don't threaten to sue the department, because what we've found is that makes it so you can't talk to anybody in the department anymore. And like, you got some peer supporters who really care about you. How can we help you get through this without isolating yourself? Because that's actually what we've seen happening. People finally raise their hand. They say, I need help. And then they go home and they sit for 3 months and they don't get the care. They don't get the help they need. They're cut off from their department, which actually they didn't realize was closer to them than their actual family. And they sit in a recliner and they rock back and forth until something really bad happens, or they just go back to work unwell. Like, your story is literally the story that we hear all the time. And there's so much opportunity there. So when somebody comes into our care, if we can, and it makes sense and it's safe for the person in our care, we're going to have a peer supporter on release of information so that we can help them get back to work. Because like I said, 90% of our people go back to work. So we've really realized the onus is also on us to make sure that we're doing what we can to help educate the department into how to make that a more seamless process. Because too, at the end of the day, guess what else is happening? The rest of the department is watching. And so if if it goes well for that person who asked for help, well, then it's a lot more likely that that person maybe was honestly, these are not just like hypotheticals. You know, we've seen it happen. People say like, no, I was going to commit suicide, but then I watched so-and-so go to treatment and he came back and he seems so much better. So I figured I might as well.
Yeah.
Like the department is watching. Mike?
Yeah, so I've seen departments when there's discipline involved, their avenue is to hand out that discipline, give them days on the beach, whatever that is, but there's no avenue for them to get better. And we don't have to wait till you hit rock bottom to get better, right? But we have to educate the command. Here's some options. Maybe we'll come up with a second chance kind of agreement where the person that's being disciplined, they have some skin in the game. And, if you want to stay here with us, here's some, suggestions, here's a plan. And there's going to be somebody like myself, a wellness coordinator, a chaplain, whoever that is, to kind of be that accountability person to help them get through that process. We don't have to wait till they hit rock bottom, but we tend to do that. But, we just do that. We haven't been educated, and the culture is still the culture.
Yeah. And it just, something just hit me too. And I'll just stop with this, but it's like the way you were just explaining just hit me. It's like, how do we discipline our children? I mean, because there's a huge difference between discipline and punishment. And our kids don't get into a pickle in life when we say, okay, literally go sit in a corner for 3 months and like there's no support. Like, and then also when you say sorry and you come back and you said that it was because you needed help, like we're not going to help you. I was just thinking it's when we're talking about when discipline is involved, it really, there's so much opportunity for us to really treat it like discipline and not like punishment. Anyway.
No, and I like that because there are a lot of people there are departments that are more progressive that are like, okay, this person's going through something. Maybe they did some self-sabotaging behavior, they made some stupid choices, but the departments are recognizing, let's continue to reform and support this person. We don't want to lose. There's not that many people coming in these days. So it's really important for departments to not just be like, oh, you screwed up, you're fired. What's going on? Let's get you the help. And if it takes months or a year, you're helping that person, whether they stay or whether they go. You're helping that person, and everybody got into the profession to serve and protect. So that means serving and protecting our own as well. So that's super important. There are still some departments that they see stuff, and we had a client recently who was let go from their department because they responded to a call. There was a trauma that happened, and they were provided zero wellness resources, and then were disciplined for not being able to function according to somebody else's measure. And then they were let go, and they're sitting there now. They're completely lost. They had a trauma, and now they have an additional trauma because they were not respected enough to say, hey, let's get you help. And they asked, they were very vocal about trying, I need help, and nobody provided it. So departments need to continue. Conversations need to continue to up the game and really look at like, let's not just the discipline versus punishment. I mean, if they really screw up, you guys know you have everybody set up to be like, did you really screw up, or are you exhibiting something that's a red flag indicator?
Well, part of stress is
go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Mike.
Katie, you hit it on the head. Everybody's watching, right? How you treat that person, and they're watching. So it's how you handle that is gonna, predict future behavior on how you handle others. So everybody's watching. And so, we just have to do better. And I think we could all agree with that.
Everybody's watching, and also everybody's learning, just like kids. We're going to go back to kids again, where if you have a couple kids and you watch one kid get away with stealing a cookie from the cookie jar and no punishment, they're going to know, well, they can get away with it. Everybody's going to push boundaries. And the next thing you know, the department has all sorts of IAs going and all sorts of issues because there were no boundaries because people are watching. So if everybody's watching, so when it comes to the wellness space and it comes to professionalism, really making sure that you're having solid policies and quality going on in all realms. Chris, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, thinking back, and Mike, you kind of jarred this for me. When I shared I took 3 months off, how awesome would that have been if my agency would have had something in place You're taking 3 months off for PTS related issues, work related. We have an option for you that if you want to take it, you can, but we have this structured program that you can use while you're taking time off. Because I'm thinking back, 3 months, I didn't do anything. Time was my worst enemy because I had so much time by myself. Because at that time, my wife at the time, we'd separated. So now I'm in a house full of memories. And I had nothing, no structure. And as a first responder, we're really big with structure, right? We want structured lives. And now all of a sudden, I no longer have a structured life. I now no longer have a pattern of life like going to work Monday through Thursday from 5 a.m. till 3 p.m., right? And how great would that have been if they would have had something in place? So, Katie, kind of explain to those of us who aren't too familiar with how your facility works. How does an officer get there, or a first responder get there, and then what's the day like, the typical day, and how long does it last?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the treatment center, so it is a 60 to 90-day program with a 45-day minimum. And everything that we do, all of those numbers, it's all related to outcomes and, numbers and outcomes and improvement in symptoms. So it's located in Newport Beach with supportive housing in the surrounding beach communities like Huntington Beach. And essentially what would happen is, so for example, if one of you called me and said like, hey, Katie, we got somebody, we think we're sitting in the presence of somebody who's really in need of inpatient care, you would just call the admissions line. The admissions team would do a 45-minute phone assessment and go through what's going on. Just make sure that, we can fill the need, identify what's really going on, ensure their safety. It's an insurance-based program, so we are in network with most health insurance companies. So we will just go over what that looks like for that person. And then upon admitting, it's a really dignified program. So when you hear inpatient, outpatient, treatment center, it kind of gives that feeling like a hospital or like lockdown facility. It's not that. So those are the terms that we use because that is the level of care that we provide. So we provide inpatient and outpatient residential treatment. And so somebody would come in and everybody, for the most part, admits to what we call phase one. And when you're in phase one, typically people will stay there anywhere from like a week, 10 days, sometimes up to 20 days or so. Again, really depending on what they have going on. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, been in therapy for 3 years, just have these very specific PTS situations I want to work on, not using any substances, love my wife, everything's great. Their stay at phase one is probably going to be a lot shorter than somebody who comes in needing detox, really dysregulated, but still everyone comes in at phase one because we need to help people settle in. You're not a cop here. People are still, they still have their professions, obviously, but we want people to just come in, settle in, get regulated, and let their nervous systems calm down. So all of the care at the first phase of care will be provided inside of the houses. And so you'll do therapy, group therapy, individual counseling. We have 24/7 nursing on site. We also work with a physician and a psychiatrist. So we can do detox at the house if needed. After phase one, people will leave that house, and then they will move to a different living component in the surrounding area. At phase two, they then go to and from their living component to our actual facility where they will do groups essentially all day long. The actual days feel more like a 40-hour work week, about 5 to 6 hours a day, about 6 days a week. And the sixth day, even though we're still doing therapeutic stuff, we try to really blend in a lot of our indoor and outdoor therapeutic modalities. So it feels like they're getting a nice blend. So the days will look like they get up, they come to the treatment center, they do individual counseling, then they move on to a group setting, and then to a different type of group. And then they do like a community lunch. They'll wrap up the day with one last group, then they go back to their housing. And then they work typically with their cohort, on whatever they want to do, really. A lot of people will journal, tie in with their family members, go on walks, kind of process the day, honestly. Something to point out is that we have the supportive housing and most of the people who stay with us stay in there. If it were me, that's where I would stay because I really can't imagine going to treatment all day long and then going home and being mom. I just can't imagine that being as therapeutically beneficial than doing that intense work all day and then going home, laying on my bed, sitting with my journal and going like, wow, what just happened? The therapeutic modalities that we offer, so we do EMDR, we do accelerated resolution therapy. That's one of our primary modalities, neurofeedback as well. We have equine therapy. We do a lot of outdoor recreation therapies. So we do group counseling, and then we have a really large family component. So when someone's admitted into our care, their spouse or significant other is then included in a weekly online support group that's just for spouses, where their person is not talked about. So it's all about, okay, yes, your person is in care. What are you doing for you? Are you in counseling? Do you have groups? What does your community look like? Because that isolation that we've seen, like with the responder, that leads right over into the family, because it actually becomes like this unit of isolation where it's like, is this normal? Is this happening? I can't talk to the fire department about this. I feel like every fire wife is perfect, and like the cop Christmas cards are amazing. Like I can't tell anybody what's going on. So it becomes like this little like nucleus situation. So we get the family member to get into their own care. We're not treating the family member. From there, then we also have a family intensive. So we'll bring family members out for like 3 or 4 days, and we do a lot of work. Individual counseling for them, group counseling, which is massive process group, a lot of psychoeducation, family systems work, and then family systems work as it relates to being in this lifestyle, a family member in this lifestyle, which is a whole different situation. And then as people approach the end of their care, they're discharged, and they can do that if they have follow-up care. So this is how Tami and I got connected, is through Mike, because part of what we help them do is come up with a long-term game plan, because we already know they're going back to work. So do you have a culturally competent therapist? What else do you need? You need coaching? Cool. You need somebody who's like a coach for law enforcement? Oh, okay, we got you. And so we'll put together like a whole aftercare plan where they know what they're doing next. And then we have the alumni. So alumni is alumni apps, alumni groups, and then we actually host alumni retreats. So we really try to do it from like the whole continuum if we're able.
No, I just want to say too, really quick, the housing, like you said, it's not some musty, facility, like nice houses. Like I went in being like, this is a vacation spot. Like these are gorgeous houses. So with that, Mike, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just going to say, Katie, can you talk about how important the group therapy is? I myself lead some groups, I'm in groups, and I would imagine similar to a critical incident debrief when you're sitting in a circle and seeing somebody talk about something you didn't think they would probably talk about. Can you just go into that and just how important that is? And I would imagine some of your clients, that's probably just game changer in itself, knowing they're not alone.
And you just said it. Thank you for like teeing that up for me. Absolutely. I mean, everything that we've talked about, the brain is designed for connection and survival. We don't do well in isolation. And you can go into some pretty wonky headspaces if you really think you might be the only one thinking that thought, having that feeling. But the group is so powerful because it really breaks down walls. And now here's what's special too. I would say that the group counseling is huge. Talking with other people is huge. Having other people give you a nod when you just talked about that thing that you thought you could never talk about, and you were the only one who had that experience, it is such a stabilizing experience. And I would say like that isn't unique either to like this setting. That's just like humans and people in general. We need feedback. We need other people. But it really pulls you out of that individual isolation, and it makes safety. It creates safety. And we actually talk quite a bit like through Shift Wellness and where we do our retreats and through the treatment center about the strength and power of tribal healing. And that's what that does. I mean, we are designed to survive. We are designed to connect. We are designed to be part of something bigger than us. And again, especially with this group of folks who typically got into this because they wanted to be part of something bigger, isolation doesn't work well. And sometimes not being isolated literally just means opening your mouth and starting to talk and having other people hear you. And that kind of can do a lot of work. But then to get a pat on the back or I've been there, bro. Like, I hear you. I'm there with you. Like, let me call you. It changes people's lives. I mean, and to say out loud too, it's like I've worked with people who said like, yeah, no, I'm on the fence about whether or not, I want to do this. And then they ended up coming, and then it actually turns out what they were on the fence about was whether or not they were going to kill themselves. It's like opening their mouths and talking about that stuff can make all the difference in the world. And it doesn't even have to be that big, obviously. It's you know, what do you think? You tell me how powerful it is too.
Well, I was going to say the power of the nod. I mean, as presenters, for everybody that goes to conferences or to any kind of talk or instructors, it's nerve-wracking. It is high pressure to get up on stage in front of not just an audience, but first responders, cops that are like, like that's not the most welcoming. Okay, yay. So the head nod, and that's one of the things that we look for when we teach is the subtle, yep, because we know we're being understood and it's resonating. It doesn't have to be like, yeah, it's just the head nod. So my thing is whether you're in group, whether you're, in a debrief, you're at a seminar, mindfulness, again, having the self-awareness, a head nod of like, yep, it speaks volumes to whoever else is speaking and sharing and being open and vulnerable.
Yeah, we held a conference a few years ago where our coaches came into town, and we sat them all. The first thing we did to introduce ourselves, we sat them all in a big circle, and we introduce your name, introduce yourself, and then share a funny story that happened to you all. You were a first responder, right? And so we were doing that. This is how we introduce ourselves to each other. And there were some retired officers that actually cried during this process, even though it's supposed to be fun, kind of get to know each other. But they had been retired after some took medical retirements because for getting shot in the line of duty, and in normal retirement. But since retirement, they kind of isolated themselves from the first responder world, and this was the first time that they felt that connection again, right? And sometimes we don't think about the retirees as well. They're kind of like on their own. They feel that way, and so it was kind of cool to watch that. But again, it goes back to that tribal mentality. You're back in your tribe again, people that understand what you went through and what you've gone through and what you're going through currently. So yeah, the head nod is pretty huge for us too. Katie, I really like what you guys are doing in that with that program, because Tami and I we toured some of your houses that you guys have, and they're beautiful homes. I wanted to move in, and it's right off the beach too in some of those. So now I think it's cool you remove them from their stress, right? From work, you even remove them from the state that they're in, because correct me if I'm wrong, it could be from any state. You accept anybody from anywhere, right? As long as they're first responders. I don't know, people that have to come back again because it's starting all over.
We definitely, so one of the reasons why our alumni component is so strong and why we do like a step down process and why our length of care is so long, not all 90 days is done in-house necessarily. Not all 90 days is done with us physically at the exact same level of care for that exact reason. And so in the state of California, and we wouldn't be able to do this across state lines, but we also now have online IOP. Now, I'm not a huge fan of online IOP if a higher level of care is needed. But if somebody comes in at the highest level of care, not phase 1, and then they step down to phase 2, and then on their way out, they're doing online IOP, and they're working with coaches, and they're doing support groups. Well, then what happens is you've created a step up, a step down, but you've also created an easy step back in, because it's not a linear process, right? And it's definitely not going to happen the first time. I mean, our goal, because we've seen the outcomes and we know like we have a 65% reduction in even reportable PTS symptoms by the time somebody leaves our care. And that's for folks who've only been with us like 60 days or so. Like that's a big deal. And 90% go back to work. But yes, we do have people who have gained the level of self-awareness and bravery to raise their hand again. And that's actually captured through how we manage our alumni as well. So that alumni app that I talked about, it's a repository of information and resources. It's also a communication platform. We have an alumni weekly online support group that's hosted by one of our clinicians, and that continues to go. And so a lot is captured there, and a lot of that is captured through the community, because if so-and-so was here every Thursday for that support group, and then they dropped off, well, now they have like a whole crew of community that's probably going to tie in and check in on them. So yeah, from time to time, we do have people who need to come back again for care. We open the door right back up to them. And we also have people who, raise their hand and ask for help. And then they go, no, not right now. It's like, all right, we got you. But like a year later, maybe they're ready, so it happens both ways.
It's okay to not be ready. There's,
Yeah.
people think, oh, we should ourselves. I should be doing this or I should do that. There's no should, there just is. You're either, by not being ready, but trying, that's getting you ready. And eventually you will be in that spot. I like that you guys have the alumni part, because part of it is, especially with addiction, the saying, I got this, when it comes to recovery, no, you don't. You don't have it on your own. If you had it on your own, you'd be fine. You need that community. You need to keep talking. You need to have support, and we in every realm. And then, I love how what we're doing, like you said, you can refer out to us after if they're like the, just ongoing conversations. We love having the resource that if we have somebody come into one of our sessions, we know, hey, this is getting to a point where it's a little out of the realm of coaching, and we have a vetted company that we can refer you out, and we know we're going to do it good. Like when we came and sat at the table, it was an embarrassing moment for me, because I got like little kid in a candy store excited. When everybody was talking, I was just like, oh, you guys get it. Like these people get it, because there are some people that are well-intentioned, but the nails here and there hitting over here, like they're just not, and you guys are nailing it. And so I absolutely love what you guys are doing. For anybody that's watching, if you yourself, or somebody that's not even, you don't have to be on rock bottom, just exhibiting, maybe they're just drinking a little too much, needing something, a conversation can go a long way. So I would say reach out. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So really quick, I would like to go around and have everybody, if somebody were to just tune into this last part, what is your little piece of guidance or advice that you would have to our audience? Mike, we'll start with you.
Mine for sure would be definitely have some sort of check-in, whoever that is with, a trusted individual, a chaplain, somebody from peer support, a wellness coordinator, a therapist. Just doing a monthly check-in can be a game changer, because again, like Tami said, we're all going through stuff, and just sometimes just getting that out will just help you tremendously.
Yeah, I'd say normalize talking. Especially if you've experienced a really traumatic call, it's okay to talk about it. And chances are the things that you're experiencing, your coworkers and other first responders probably have experienced it or are experiencing it. So you're not alone. So don't, try not to isolate, but normalize talking. And I think that'll help really maintain that level of balance for you.
I would say, it like if somebody were chiming in right now and needed to hear like a sign is like this, it is you count, this is your sign. Because typically it's like if you've made it this far into this conversation and this has been of interest to you and you're wondering like, I wonder if this should be for me, or I wonder if I should look into it, just look into it. Because I've never, unless you're like the one super unique person that doesn't get affected by it. But yeah, I would say like this is definitely for you. Like if any of this made a lot of sense to you, or like really piqued your interest in like getting self-help or like getting care for yourself, just pick up the phone and ask questions and start getting the information. Because typically what I've seen is that people in public safety get help way, way, way after the general population.
Yeah. And you never know what somebody is dealing with. And for case in point, I just kept a straight face the entire time. I've been dripping blood out of my arm for half of this conversation because I accidentally picked a scab, and my arm is full of blood right now. I've been like, if anybody goes back and watches, they'll see my eye look down and be like, oh, so I've had a Post-it catching blood. So you don't know what somebody is dealing with. So it's really important to lean into people and make sure, hey, take care of yourself, and talk it out. Because you don't know.
You never know.
You'd never know. So, so those tuning in, I'm going to put First Responder Wellness contact information at the end of this. Please, again, reach out, get more information if you want to talk. If you're just not sure, you can reach out to us and say, hey, I just want to talk. So again, I think every theme of this is going to be like, you need to talk more. It's okay. But thank you, Katie, for being here. Thank you to everybody tuning in, and until next week.